Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of recorder videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. In this Kickstarter review video, we're going to look at the Haunt of Erminsk, a level 3 to 5 mini-adventure for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, designed by the Legends of Athelu team and coming to Kickstarter on May 1st. This video has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. This is a murder mystery investigation adventure, which is, I think, one of the more compelling genres you can do for a tabletop RPG, and also one of the more challenging adventures you can do for a tabletop RPG. I tend to give a little bit more maybe leeway, because to do a proper murder mystery, I think you have to cede a lot of control to the players, which we can argue about how you're supposed to be doing that as a DM anyway, or a GM. But in particular here, where you want it to feel like the players are really putting together the clues and they're deciding on where to go and who to investigate and all this, it gets a lot trickier to design a adventure around that, because you kind of need things to happen at certain bottlenecks in order to create that content as the designer for the game master to be able to run that content for the players who are actually kind of running the show. So this has a very open-ended investigation, which I like, and then it very awkwardly transitions into a climax, which I don't think works as well, but then the climax itself is pretty interesting. This is a flawed adventure in some ways, and I think it does succeed in some ways as well. So it's probably not the best murder mystery that I have reviewed on here. It does feature a lot of extra components that I really love, that does enhance the product. For example, full color battle maps, portrait art for all of the very large cast of NPCs, even custom like VTT tokens, immersive player handouts, all these extra little quality of life improvements that are a huge thumbs up. But when it comes down to it, what is the adventure? Is it actually compelling? Is it interesting? In this case, I think the answer is somewhat. It's a very tentative, like, yeah, I think so, with the huge caveat that this is 90% social and role-playing investigation, to the point where I'm actually shocked that there are basically no even skill checks in here. There is a few combat encounters, including a climactic one at the end, but it is the bulk of the investigation here is going around and talking to people and gathering clues, gathering information. So if the thing you need to know going into this adventure, the biggest thing you need to know is your players going to enjoy that kind of gameplay? Are they going to be the kind that's going to have notebooks open and wanting to meet people and talk to them and getting to know them and learning information, and that leads them to other people that they can then talk to, and it all takes place in this one, small town area? And these characters, they're pretty well detailed, and I do think the information is organized, but you have to be able to enjoy that kind of gameplay, versus if you want to like stake an area out or do some investigation work, there's not as many opportunities for that versus just going around and talking to people. So if you're, for example, playing a kind of player character that's not really interested in doing that, I don't think your player character is going to get a whole lot out of this adventure. So it's a very specific gameplay style in a specific niche of a specific subgenre of tabletop RPG. If that all is going to appeal to you, then I think we need to pay attention to this review and determine if this is going to be a worthwhile adventure to run. This takes place in a fantasy setting called the Legends of Athelu, which I am not familiar with. It is by this design team, and unfortunately there's not really information about this particular fantasy setting in the context of this PDF. Obviously, I'm hoping the Kickstarter points to that. I did go to the website, which is mentioned here at legendsofathelu.com, and kind of read a little bit of the background story. For example, there's only two of the typical fantasy races in this world. There are humans and elves, and they apparently have some drama with each other. It's kind of a low magic world. For example, necromancy isn't a normal school of magic, so people can't just be resurrected left and right. All that information would be kind of nice to have in the context of this adventure, because there is a little bit of backstory with why this particular ghost is rumored to haunt the kind of forested area around this village, and comes from these, elves who've had their homes displaced, as the humans moved in and established a village here. So just a little bit more background about the actual setting would have been nice. Obviously, yes, you can take this and put it in, the Sword Coast or Forgotten Realms or whatever you wanted to without really changing a whole lot, which is certainly a big positive. But specifically, this is meant to take place in the this specific design fantasy world, and I didn't really get any information about how, some background information about that world would have been nice, even in just this smaller adventure. The entire adventure takes place in Erminsk, which is this small logging lumber town outside of the Black Ridge Forest, and there are rumors of a ghost that haunts the area. The whole thing is kind of, honestly, this reminds me of a Scooby-Doo adventure in a lot of ways, and I don't say that as a negative. Very important about this, even though I'm not necessarily a big Scooby-Doo fan, literally, but I have heard, and I would agree with, that if you wanted some good general plot structuring advice for like one-shots or adventures or things, go and look at Scooby-Doo episodes, adventures and cartoons, because that stuff is actually structured pretty close to how you would do a classic murder mystery investigation. And this is very much feels like that, because like there is a monster here, but of course the real monster is just a person, and they're not even like wearing a mask and pretending to be the monster, but that is a little bit what they're doing, because they've got this, the monster is this this wraith kind of ghost spirit, and it's always accompanied by this really creepy fog. Well, the villain in this case has a magic ring that can cast like fog cloud once per day, and so he's basically just pretending to be that. But he's not even it's kind of funny, he's not even an evil dude. It's this person right here, Boris. He kind of accidentally kills somebody. He runs the inn, and he bought this really expensive wine, and he's sharing it with this friend, this employee of the inn, and the dude dies, and he's like, oh shit, and he basically covers it up, and takes him out to and buries his body in the woods. And unfortunately for him and the other victims, he believes that one of them from the inn, this woman, witnessed it, so he has her killed by slipping her the wine as well. And then this young teenage girl who is out with this whole other plot line to go and try to like stake out the real ghost, ends up accidentally seeing him burying the bodies or coming back, whatever the context is, and he ends up killing her. So it's kind of this, what is it called? Boris has been set by a calamity of errors. I did chuckle at that, because like, yeah, that's one way of, but that's how his defense lawyer would put it, I think. Your Honor, he was beset by a calamity of errors. Just, if only people would stop showing up when they didn't need to, then he wouldn't have to kill them. So I like the fact that he's not really like this horrible evil. He doesn't, it's almost refreshing. He doesn't have this like horribly evil, cult or villainous motivation or anything. He just kind of accidentally killed somebody, and he's kind of had to keep covering it up. He's not incompetent or anything. Obviously, he's willing to kill people, but I thought that was kind of an interesting twist. So you've got 4 missing people. This isn't a single person has gone missing, by the way, because he accidentally killed the first one, and then he killed 2 others because he thought they witnessed it. And then there's a 4th person who's gone missing, which is actually not even tied to this main plot line. Instead, it's tied to the actual titular haunt here, and he shows up at the very end. So if this is like the advanced version of a mystery, of a murder mystery, which could be very compelling for you and your players if you're looking for a more advanced challenge, which is why at the beginning I made sure that your group is going to be on board with this, because I don't think this would be for the neophytes, the newbies into this genre, because there are, as I said, red herrings, which is a term for when you kind of fake the players out, or you get them to believe like, oh, like this person's the killer, even though they're really not, which I think is a very dangerous thing to do in a tabletop RPG, because it's very easy for your players to get to focus on like one clue or the wrong thing, and then go down this whole other path, and you're just like pulling your hair out as the DM or GM trying to run this thing, and it just gets to be kind of a disaster. But if your players are smart, if they're savvy, if they're willing to gather all these clues, then I think it can work. But already it gets pretty daunting at the very beginning when they gain this quest from this woman, Alora, which there are some adventure hooks provided, which they're all basically like, hey, you've either been hired, or you just hear about these, this ghost that stalks the town, and there's been missing people. And of course, people are trying to put, 2 and 2 together. But I like the twist that it's not actually the ghost, although the ghost does show up at the end. But you have to investigate all of these different missing people. So already you get this open-ended investigation, and I do love the way that this investigation is organized. It is actually probably one of the best organized adventures of specifically investigation adventures that I've seen, because it's all given with nice bullet points and sidebars. Every single NPC. I mean, look at this, the way it breaks down each individual murder to where it's like, hey, here's how the death happened. Here's the response from our main perpetrator on how he, pretends to have his alibi. Here's important notes for the DM to know. Like, wow, I was actually extremely impressed by the way this is organized, because that's another challenge that these kind of adventures have to convey is tell me, the DM, all the information I need to know without it being overwhelming and just having to sift through paragraphs of information in terms of what the player should be doing, what I should know, when should they know things, what are the alibis of the various people, what are the motivations of all these people. So it's a very character-focused investigation, but it does a very, very good job of conveying that information to the GM, and we get some really, really cool artwork as well. So it makes the product look very good. I'm not a fan, if I may have one complaint about the actual presentation and layout, this background that makes it look like I just pulled this book out of my drawer I have behind me, which is full of PC game manuals from the early 1990s, where they're all just kind of creased and stained and just not in good shape. Every single page, if you notice when I flip through, you can see this one little like crease is still there. So I'm not a fan of the like distressed page look. I don't know, it's a little too much for me. But you know what? I also think ripped jeans are super dumb. Maybe I'm just old and uncool, but that's my little complaint about it. I do love this character artwork, however, and I like that it really brings forth the personality, which is key for any adventure that focuses on people. Having faces to put to people is very important. We also get these nice bullet point rundowns, as well as all the information on the case. Again, this is for the player group that's going to want to have those notepads open, or if you're playing on a VTT, notepad, I guess, and they're going to be writing down clues and information. And you picture like the cross section of somebody having a blackboard up with pins in it and these like red lines and things. That's the kind of investigation this is, because they'll learn more things. And there's a little bit of a red herring with the young teenager went out with this guy from the orphanage, and he was super into creepy stuff, and he's even got some really cool drawings. I'll skip down to the this looks like something out of like Bird Box or something. And you think, oh man, this guy's the creepy guy who's doing some stuff. That's the red herring, and he's not a part of it at all. So I think the investigation itself is interesting, but then you get to a very awkward part where you've learned all of these different clues. You think you've got a pretty good handle the fact that, okay, we're putting two and two together that people were involved in the forest. So let's go look at like the forest and follow that clue, which there's not even any skill. Again, there's been no skill checks for any of this, by the way. It's just all written in terms of learning information. And then there's a one wolf encounter, which is fine. You dig up clues, you find the bodies. That's obviously very important. And so you've got your evidence, and you can put two together and pin it on Boris. Then it gets really awkward when it tries to transition from this open investigation section, which I think is very compelling if you like that specific genre of going around investigating and talking to people, and then trying to bottleneck the players into this specific climax, which has to take place in the forest at night as Boris is murdering the quest giver, which I like, or has already murdered the quest giver and is trying to bury her body, which I like that. The problem is, how do you bridge that gap? And I don't think the adventure does a good job of explaining how to do that. In fact, literally on page 32, it says, after returning to town, it should be much later in the day. They should somehow figure out that Boris is headed to the forest in the evening. That's not good game design. Don't. They should somehow figure out. Like, no, we need to have this nailed down. And you've done such a good job so far of giving me all the information, bullet points and all the different clues that lead to this. And now you're just saying, okay, now somehow DM or GM, bring the group from this open point into this close. And even says if they try to go to the forest too early, then they're not there because it has to be at night. It feels really awkward and dumb. I don't know why we couldn't have a better. And if you can't do that, then give me some multiple options about like, okay, here's what happens if they go today. Then here's what happens if they go tonight. Maybe they go to this person, they'll get a clue. Maybe somebody will run up to them and be like, oh no, we saw Boris, leaving with, you have to move the party forward somehow. Don't just don't say somehow to me. You design it for me. So I did not like that at all. But when we get to the actual climax, I think it works pretty well, because then you've got your classic twist climax at the end where Boris has killed Elora, which is a pretty big deal because she's the one you've been working for, basically. And he's like, oh, you got too close. I need to take you out. And then you can immediately, there is no fight with him, by the way. He's like, oh, you got me. And he spills the beans, gives up everything. And it's like, okay, we caught him. And hopefully the players don't just murder him, but try to turn him in. And then as you're leaving the forest, that because he kills Elora, who is an elf, this haunt thing goes after anybody who spills elven blood. So that triggers the actual monster that we've all been hearing about. And so it shows up, it murders Boris, and then the players can choose to either fight it or not. They can just leave it. It's kind of weirdly inconsequential. Like, it can kill, I guess they could try to keep Boris alive and fight it. It's this weird kind of optional thing where they could treat, maybe that's an interesting morality thing. They could choose to have this haunt just kill Boris, and then they just leave and let it happen. That could certainly be an option for the players. So it's just kind of a optional thing, but we do get some nice battle maps for that. And then when you return, you can just turn in basically the sad news to everybody and be like, yep, everybody died. In fact, another person died on our watch while doing the investigation. Whoops. And we either have the dude in custody or we let him get killed by the actual haunt thing. And thus there is very little closure for everybody here, I suppose. But I thought that was still an interesting twist with having the haunt show. Oh, and then the fourth missing person shows up as having been hunting the haunt this whole time, and then he's also just supposed to die because I guess everybody dies. It feels like a very gritty kind of low magic world for the setting, and it's almost like if you took a kind of a Scooby-Doo-esque plot. And again, I don't mean that as a put down. I actually mean that as just a very classic way of structuring an investigation into a low magic D&D 5e setting. This is kind of what you would end up getting. I do wish there was a bit more balance between just being able to explore like missing scenes and having actual like skill checks and everything. I think the only one involved is going into the inn and then finding the poisoned wine. Okay, there are actually DCs listed here. There we go. And unlocking things. So there's a little bit of skill checks at the very beginning. I think just in this inn, though. And I don't think there's any. The biggest one that makes me crazy is that there's no insight checks. And you'd think, talking to people, you're trying to gain information. You think insight would be a huge, huge part of that. I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm already talking about my cons. Let's go over my full pros and cons for this adventure, as that is pretty much the beginning, middle, and end that I've gone over. Pro, it's a non-linear mystery investigation that focuses on social role-playing. I'm going to include that as a pro because I think it's it does what it wants to do very well, but you do need to know that that's what this is. It is a social role-playing focused investigation where you are talking to people 90% of the time. And if that doesn't appeal to you, then no matter how good this is, you're not going to like it. So I think that's important to know, but I will include that as a pro. Pro, a twist climax that plays with player haunt expectations. You're expecting it's going to be this villain, and you're expecting it's going to be the haunt behind everything, or maybe the villain's even pretending to be the haunt, which he kind of is with the fog cloud thing, but his motivation is just kind of a calamity of errors or something, which I still think is funny. And then you actually have the haunt show up at the end because he does kill the wrong person, and that makes the creature show up. So all of that, I think, works out pretty well for the climax. Pro, over a dozen detailed NPCs, each with really awesome portrait art. This really does sell it to me very, very well, all the different enhancements. In fact, my other pro is full color battle maps, immersive player handouts, and VTT-friendly tokens. None of that you can see in this PDF, but it includes a separate zip file that includes all of these extra, you can see the handouts were like these creepy pictures, and then you've got these written information that you get from the quest giver, which is all very cool. That's awesome, by the way. Anytime you can give me things I can hand out to the players is a big thumbs up. And then the actual battle maps are, there's only really 3, I think, locations. There's the wolf battle, there's the final battle, and then technically you can explore the inn a little bit. But we get maps for all those things, which is awesome. It's not necessarily a map art style that I'm used to, but I thumbs up to giving me some content for that. So all of that is awesome. The cons are awkward transition from the investigation to the climax. I don't give me somehow they have to be at this location at this time. Like, you need to write down, like, how does this happen? If the players are lost and they have not gotten to the solution, how do they get there? Have a backup plan, basically, for maybe an NPC runs up and says, oh no, this and this has happened, and so have it timed in there so that the players don't reach this, either get to the conclusion too early or never get to the conclusion, and they need to reach a certain point at a certain time. It's a very tricky thing, and I get it. Like it's very tricky to design this kind of adventure when you have a player focused investigation, but you need it to reach a certain spot at a certain time. Yeah, that's a challenge, but I don't think this necessarily does that very well, even though I like the before and the after. Con, it lacks really important skill checks. Other than the, again, those kind of locked doors in the inn, I don't think there's any like perception checks for investigating the forest. I don't think there's no insight checks for talking to all these people. Every single one of these people should have some kind of insight check involved. Like if I'm playing D&D and I'm playing an investigation thing, like you're rolling insight on every single one of these conversations and trying to figure it out. And then I need this adventure to tell me like what, and maybe it's by person. Maybe some people are better lying than others. Maybe they have certain stats that can, it's a contested check or something. And what does the player learn if they, succeed or fail at the insight check? Like that information kind of needs to be in here. I'm kind of shocked that it's not. So that was a big con. And the other con is kind of a minor one, which is I was hoping to get more information about the Athelu setting. And it doesn't have to be, don't give me your big long, this isn't a source book. I get that. But just give me a little bit of a background context. For example, the animosity between, elves and humans, if that's a thing, or just kind of the low magic setting in general, the gritty feeling. Because otherwise, my brain is immediately, if you're making this for 5e, my brain is immediately thinking Sword Coast Forgotten Realms. It just is, unless you tell me otherwise. So I don't know, just based on the context of this PDF, how much extra information I should know. It doesn't have to be a big long thing. Maybe just even a half a page of a quick kind of background information that's relevant to this adventure, which is specifically like the elves and humans, I think is part of it. Then that would be very helpful to have. Final verdict, The Haunt of Erminsk is a flawed but interesting murder mystery investigation enhanced by an excellent suite of art and VTT-ready material. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com, and you can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on the YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Thank you.